All right, we are live. So hi everybody, it is 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, so we're going to get started. As you can see, we're once again broadcasting live from the Scholastic Education Studio here in my dining room. Welcome to our nationwide Amplifying Ideas series, where we interview incredible educators from across the country to learn about what they're focusing on and the strategies they're using to engage and support their students and their fellow teachers. My name is Sean Campbell, and I'm the Digital Resources Manager for Scholastic Education. And I'd like to start by thanking everyone for joining us. It's been a tough year, so just know that we love you guys so much, and thank you so much for tuning in. Remember to subscribe to my YouTube channel and follow me on Twitter at Campbell Online, right there. And that'll give you more information on the Amplifying Ideas series and our upcoming guests and showtimes. All right, without further ado, I would like to introduce a wonderful educator and all-around great person that I've had the pleasure to work with for a few years now, Denise Wehner. Denise is the district principal of Transformative Education for the Sooke School District on the beautiful traditional territory of the Coast Salish peoples. Denise has been an educator for 22 years and believes deeply in the power of connection, reflection, and student agency. You can follow her on her Twitter at Kaizenshik, right there. I would now like to welcome Denise. Hi, Denise. How are you?
Hello, I'm well, Sean. Thanks for having me.
You bet. So as I was reading the introduction, I don't think I have ever properly got the pronunciation of your last name. Is it Wehner?
You know what? You got it exactly right. You know, when are you going to get it right?
Hey.
So
There's a
that's
first time for everything.
Yeah. And thanks for checking in. You know, it's really important to get people's names right. It's the name that they were given, whether by marriage or through birth. And it's a sign of respect to get people's names right. So thanks for checking in on that.
You bet. And it's something I often get wrong. So it's something I have a lot of practice with. So I'm glad I got it right. That's excellent. So before we get into anything else, real curious about this Twitter handle right there. Kaizenshik, where did that come from?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. So I joined Twitter in 2004, I think, like a really long time ago when it first, 2008 maybe. And as a teacher and as a young teacher, and, you know, a lot of people just had their names, but I wanted something that was a little bit interesting that spoke to who I was. And I have a history as an ELL teacher and working with a lot of different cultures. And Kaizen is a Japanese term, and it means forever improving, ever getting better, and ever learning. And I thought that really captured who I was as an educator and who I am today. And all these years later, it still rings true. I remember a colleague I worked with who said, okay, now you're a VP, you've got to change that, you know, whatever Kaizenshik is, you got to get a proper Twitter handle. And I said, no, I think I just need to educate people about what Kaizen actually means. And it's the spirit that I live in. It's Japanese culture. I'm not Japanese at all, but I do have respect for cultures. So that's what I've adopted.
I love it. And that whole lifelong learning piece is, I think, working with educators, and my mom was a teacher. I think that is such a huge part of what that community preaches and how we're all really successful, like whether, and not just monetarily, but you know, mental health. And so, yeah, I love that. I think that's a great, excellent Twitter handle. And that was actually part of the reason I reached out to you, is because you're doing some really cool stuff on social media, sharing some really great information. And I was just wondering how you were using social media to kind of benefit you professionally or personally. I know it's been so huge. It sort of had this great rise even before the pandemic, but then since the pandemic, huge, great way for educators to connect.
Yeah, I love Twitter, and not that I love social media in particular. I don't love Facebook or Instagram, even though I am on Instagram, but that's my personal account. But Twitter for me is my professional account, and it's all things education, and as a professional learning community is on there. And for me, I've always said to people, it is the best, hands down the best, hashtag Pro D in your PJs. And so for me, you know, we all have such busy lives with our families and with work and all of our commitments and our balance that sometimes in the morning when you're scrolling through your phone and social media, when I'm on Twitter, I'm actually learning and I'm improving and I'm making connections and I'm finding things out and I'm being inspired. And so it's a positive way to use social media to inform you. And so it's a way to connect with educators and leaders across the world in ways that maybe you wouldn't have thought of before. So I've learned so much and connected so much. It is truly the best Pro D I've ever done at home in bed with my coffee in 2 days.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, it's funny. I have a buddy who's a big businessman, and he was talking about how he doesn't advertise on Twitter anymore because it's anything you put up there becomes kind of a fight in the comments or name calling. And I use it for work as well, and I follow all educators, and I don't find that at all. Like, it's very supportive. There's lots of people sharing great ideas, sharing even sharing resources. It's fantastic, and there is obviously some negativity. People are tired. There's some union admin beefs or whatever, but the vast majority of the conversation I see on there is so positive. So it's kind of cool to hear you say that. And just, I feel like this education cloud or this little bubble within Twitter is so positive, while the rest of it might be a bit more negative.
Yeah, that's an interesting comment. And my experience has been the same, Sean, about how it's always been positive, and it's always been, how do we lift each other up and be a collective community of learners, and #better together. And certainly when the pandemic hit and a lot of schools, and certainly across the globe, we were forced to teach remotely and teach online. And there were just an abundance of people across the world sharing things. And in Asia, when they went back to school before we did in North America, we were able to learn from them. How did you bring your students back safely? What were the protocols in your schools? And it was just a really transparent and easy access way to look at that. But what I will say that what you said that made me think, there's an educator out of the University of Winnipeg, and his name is Kevin Lamoureux, and he's Indigenous, and he has been leading and is part of the Truth and Reconciliation document for the federal government. And I heard him speak about equity, which is something that I'm really passionate about. And I thought, well, I'm following this man on Twitter. And it's interesting, I couldn't right away. He has something that Twitter in their updates, there's something called this user's tweets are protected. And like a protected social media account, you have to request. And so he had to approve me before I was able to actually see his feed. And so immediately I thought, why is that? This is a recognized, important man, but he's an Indigenous man, and he's speaking about truth and reconciliation. And I can only wonder, from his vantage point, from where he is, what kind of comments he might be getting that I'm not getting as a privileged cisgendered white woman. Right? Or you have a white male. It's interesting. That's the first I'd ever encountered that from an educator.
Yeah. And that's a good perspective to kind of get an idea of. And it is kind of interesting that Twitter gives you those tools as well. So it can help you control your conversation a little bit too, which is nice. So have you ever reached out to someone on Twitter that you found has given you some good ideas?
Yeah, that is the thing about Twitter. It makes learning and connecting so accessible. We don't always have people's emails or phone numbers, but you have their Twitter handle and you can DM people. And so, again, as I referenced earlier, I have a history of working as an English language learner coordinator. And there is someone online named Tan Nguyen and he lives in Laos. And his Twitter handle is Tan K Huynh, which is HUYNH. Excuse me, I just have a.
For sure.
And he's this brilliant educator who creates these great resources. So I just messaged him and I said, I would love to have you do some Pro D for our district in the whole South Island. And he got back to me and we arranged it. And then when I shared that out, the entire, excuse me. Why does this have to happen live?
It's all good. Take your time. Take a drink.
And so the entire ELL network on the in the South Lower Mainland, they said, what? Tan's coming to BC? We're getting him as our keynote for our Provincial Specialists Association. So since then, he has been connected to our South Island districts. He's connected to the Learn Man. He's leading professional learning all throughout British Columbia. And he's an educator from, Asia. So It's fantastic that they're so accessible. I have another cool example. So I read a book almost a year ago. It was last January, and it's called From the Ashes. And this was a Canada Reads pick. And Jesse Thistle is the author. His hashtag or his user handle is Michifman, Michifman. And he's the author of that book. And it's about disconnected to his culture and poverty and addiction and homelessness. And I just reached out to him because this was probably one of the most life-changing novels I've ever read. And I thought, this is a book every Canadian needs to read. He didn't win Canada Reads, which is a shame, but it was such a tremendous book. So I just, I reached out to him and told him what an impact his story had on me. And he responded, and we had a back and forth conversation. And then, so of course, other educators saw these tweets, retweeted out, and then an administrator in one of the high schools that has a very high Indigenous population reached out to him. And he led a book study for those high school students here in BC. So he wants his message out as an author. He's about connecting. And so it all came from reading a book, not just putting it away, but actually making a connection with the authors. So accessible. That's really the thing with Twitter.
Yeah, that's such a cool idea that you can just reach out to someone that you appreciate what they're putting out. And they'll respond. Like, it is that making our world, our bubbles even smaller. And I hope that stories like that give the confidence to other people to reach out to people that they think are fantastic, because you just never know, right? And I think we sometimes revere these people because their ideas are so cool, but they're often like us, they have downtime, and they love reaching out to colleagues as well. So that's really cool.
And what I would say is reach out to authors whenever you can. There was an author in the States. She wrote Boosting Achievement, and it's around students with formal interrupted education. And, no one predicted it, but we're in that right now globally. We have every child has formal interrupted education. Yeah. And her book was initially published. It was only shared in the States, and I couldn't order it in Canada. And so I just emailed her and I said, can you send me a copy? Yeah. And she did. And she made it to my house. And then I ended up buying a whole bunch more. And she ended up also coming and doing provincial work in BC and that in the ELL community as well. All through Twitter.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Mm-hmm. So I also understand you just started a new role with a new district in Sooke. Yeah. Is there anything that you're focusing on that you're really passionate about in Sooke that you want to make some waves with?
Yeah. So being new in a role, what I have to remember is to slow down and take time and connections and relationships, which is really important, and understanding the context of this district. Even though it's right next door to where I worked for 22 years, it is a different context, and it has tremendous great things. And so one focus is listening, finding out who the great people are in this district and what the needs and wants and desires and vision is. So understanding that and working that into my work. But another thing that I'm personally, professionally just on a bend about right now is equity. Yeah. And equity in terms of resources and just how we show up for each other and show up for students across the board. And so it's things like, my Twitter handle says she, her, we're modeling that we're not just assuming everyone's gender. And when we're looking at resources for libraries and the curriculum department, when we're looking at books, we want to make sure that the diversity and diversability of all of our school and all of our students are represented, that everyone feels included and everyone is part of it. And as someone with privilege, how do I create space for everyone's voice, for those that maybe don't have as loud of a voice as I have? So that is my lens in everything I do.
Yeah, I love it. And I think that's been so much of a bigger emphasis for people in general, but in the new curriculum and just as educators. And I think back to when I went to school, there's actually a residential school in my hometown. I had no idea. I think I found out a couple of years ago, really, and that it's ridiculous to not know these parts of our history, our shared history. And as publishers, we haven't done an amazing job in the past, right? It's often been a white professor at a really nice university who writes about other cultures and their history. And I think we're really starting to do a better job of that. And certainly not there yet, but I know I was quite proud of, like, Scholastic put together a series called Take Action for Reconciliation, and it brought together Indigenous educators from nations coast to coast. And it was amazing, like just hearing everyone's ideas and the way they work together, that everyone worked together was just fantastic. And I'm hoping Scholastic and other publishers, Strong Nations on the Island is fantastic. We're getting there. We're certainly not there yet, but it's so much better than it was even 5 years ago. I'd say 10 years ago for sure.
So awareness that Scholastic has and the rest of us have, that we need to create space and we need to include those diverse voices and diverse faces and perspectives and thoughts. Like we must. And so as long as that is how we approach it, then I think we're on the right path, even though no, we're not there yet. But as long as we keep that lens. It's interesting. We're talking a lot right now about assessment and reporting, just as the cycle of educators that we are in. And I always say, well, how are we indigenizing our assessment? And how are we looking at it? Is a test the right way to do it? How else can students show what they know? When we're assigning and we're looking at what are the learning intentions, what are the curricular competencies we're looking at in students, how are we assessing them in an Indigenous way? And that's through narrative, through story, through personal connection and student agency. It's not always a test. It's not everybody always doing the same task. And so that's the question I always invite educators to ask themselves when they're doing those assessments. And then moving towards the proficiency scales, where how proficient is a student? And it's not a percentage or a letter grade. Those are colonial constructs. And we have the opportunity. BC is so progressive with our curriculum and our Ministry of Education that we are so fortunate that we don't have to, aside from the grade to 12 graduation program, we don't have to give percentages or letter grades. And so how do we train ourselves to be thinking about what is an equitable way for students to demonstrate their learning, and how do we plan for them in meaningful ways that give them voice and agency?
Yeah, I do love that. We've talked about this before, but just the idea that a student would be at one place and then they do improve throughout the year, but they're still below where their classmates are. So they would get a bad grade, even though they made major strides, is heartbreaking to me. So I love the way we're headed, where it's more about, show us what you know and make strides for where you're at. We're not worried about what everyone else is doing. How are you doing?
Where are you right now in your point of progress, and how do we move you forward with those competencies? Yes.
Yeah. I love it. I feel like we could talk about this longer, but we do have to keep going. I was also curious about when you knew you were an educator.
Oh, fun facts. So a lot of people grew up saying, I want to be a teacher. They love teaching. They love school. They love learning. That's not me. In fact, often reported to the principal's office, often, like in trouble at school.
Yeah. Okay.
I learned the word belligerent on a pink slip. I was like, what does that word mean? So no, I didn't want to be an educator, but what I knew I wanted to do in grade 2, there was fire safety week. And, there was a contest and you had to, make a poster and talk about some fire safety skills. Well, I won for my school and I got a trophy and a visit from the fire chief and the tour of the fire hall, and I was hooked. Yeah. And I decided at 8 years old I was going to be a firefighter. And it made no difference to me that there were no women firefighters. That didn't even enter in my brain. And certainly my parents never said, well, there aren't female firefighters. This is like a silly goal of yours. Right. And then into high school, I ended up thinking about, well, what do I need to do? And at the time, in the late 80s, it was you had to have some fire sciences, you had to have your chemistry, and you had to have 1 year of post-secondary, which I did. And I took it through the Justice Institute and also the University of Calgary. And I was going to be a firefighter. And I worked really hard. And at 23 years old, I was one of the first female firefighters.
Congrats.
Municipality of Burnaby. Yeah.
Nice.
So I did it. I met my goal. I became a firefighter. And then I learned about inequities. I learned about privilege. And it was not the time for a young girl to be, for me to be a pioneer in that stage. The men who were my father's age really resented having women around. It was a change and shift in culture, and I was hired through affirmative action, and I lasted less than a year.
Yeah.
Midlife crisis at 23, and decided, well, what do I want to do? And ended up seeing a counselor, and they said, well, why did you want to be a firefighter? What was it? What are the elements of that job? You feel good about yourself. It's a community. It's not behind a desk, and you're helping others, and it's service. And we came up with, well, maybe education is where you want to go. And so rerouted, went back to university at 24. And now here I am. All these
There you are. Yeah, I love it. And it is like, it's an incredible job. Like my mom was a primary teacher for her career, and she retired a few years ago. And after she retired, the loss of she really missed that moment where a student got it. So you're helping a student learn to read, and they get it. There's a moment, there's a spark, and that's it, right? That's an amazing feeling for a teacher and student.
Yes.
And so it wasn't, it certainly wasn't the day-to-day grind and all this, but to kind of lose that. She would go back to the classroom after she retired just to help kids, because she wanted that spark back.
And kids are, and the further you go up in your administrative career, the more removed you are from students, and the less impact you have, on an individual level, but it's from a systemic level and from an equity level, which is where I'm working now, to make sure that we have the right resources in the hands of educators, that educators are having the opportunity to think about and reflect on their best practice, how they can meet students where they are. So that's the impact I have now. So although I'm not front lines with kids, gosh, I miss them.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
So before I let you go, I'm always curious about what books you're reading. What books are you recommending right now? And I'm just a travel fanatic, and I haven't been able to travel for so long, it feels like. But if you could go somewhere, so give me a good book, and give me, if you could go somewhere that you've been or is on the dream list tomorrow, where would you go?
Okay, so good book. So I'm almost through. The author's name is Lisa C.
Okay.
And it's gosh, I wish I could remember the title. This Women Seaweed. It's set in South Korea at in the 1930s and to current day, and it's the women who, it was a matriarchal society, and the women went out to work, and they were deep sea divers.
Okay.
Without clothing. They could go in freezing temperatures in the winter underwater and harvest albacore and like food, and the husbands met under the tree and took care of the children. And then it goes throughout the war, and it's just a fabulous book. So Lisa C. is the author.
And it's called The Island of Sea Women.
The Island of Sea Women. It's absolutely fantastic. I'm in the last, little bit. It's just, I love where it's going. It's again, it's kind of hard to read at times because it takes you through the Korean War and the Japanese takeover. And anyway, it's a dynamite done book. Historical fiction is always something I love because it's learning, and it's learning about cultures. So travel.
Yeah.
I was supposed to go to New York City last summer with a girlfriend for our 50th. But it didn't happen. We've got a travel credit. So that's still going to happen. But I think right now my latest priority is to cycle through Europe. With COVID and all of my gym shutting down, my yoga studio shutting down, I got a bike and I started cycling this summer, and I've just turned into a cyclist at this late stage. And I think I'd love to do some cycling trips through Europe.
I had some friends who did Italy and somewhere, Switzerland, maybe some adjoining country. And they said the best part is that like Europe's very cyclable for one, but then the Airbnbs you can rent are like castles. Like there's so many really cool places to stay at night. They thought it was the best.
Yeah. Anywhere that's a different culture, like I think we are a world global community, and I feel very insular I've been all across Canada. I've been in every province, but I haven't really been much further than that, other than California, Mexico, and those traditional, vacation places. So I'm desperate to connect with other cultures.
One day, maybe a year away, but it'll be so good when it finally happens.
Yes.
All right, Denise, that's all the time we have. That was fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me. I wish you all the best in your new role, and I know you'll do an absolutely fantastic job. And I just think the world of you. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. Hashka.
You bet. All right, everybody, that is it for Amplifying Ideas with Sean Campbell. Again, I'll put up my Twitter handle. You guys can follow me at Campbell Online, and please subscribe to the YouTube channel. And we will see you here next time. We're doing another session on Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern time, and I'll be putting up more information on Twitter. So we'll see you then. Thank you, and have a good day.